In September of 2022, fans of the Yakuza series were in for a pretty big surprise, with an unexpected tweet from the Ryu Ga Gotoku Studio account announcing a remake of Ryu Ga Gotoku Ishin. Ishin was a title that fans outside of Japan had kind of just accepted they would never get a proper localization of. But alongside fully remaking the game, they would also be translating and releasing it worldwide for the very first time. Fans were thrilled about finally getting one of the two long-awaited samurai spin-offs of the series released worldwide, and executive producer Masayoshi Yokoyama would later state in an interview that while they were never really planning on localizing the game, the success of Sucker Punch's Ghost of Tsushima in the West had given them the confidence that fans outside of Japan would actually be able to appreciate Ishin, even if they don't have the strongest understanding of the history that the story plays off of. And while I was initially only planning on making one Ishin video during this journey into the series, when I learned that the remake was actually titled Ishin Kiwami in Japan, putting it alongside the full-blown remakes of Yakuza 1 and 2, I knew that I had to cover it separately, despite so many telling me that it wouldn't really be worth it since they're pretty much the same game. And after having fully played both the original and the remake myself, they are most certainly not the same game. Plus, I loved Ishin when I played it last year, so having a valid reason to replay it didn't sound like such a bad thing. So, is Ishin Kiwami a slam dunk success that finally allows fans around the world to appreciate one of the strongest spin-offs of the series, or would it change too much and lead to an ultimately downgraded experience like the other Kiwami titles? Well, let's talk about it. But before getting too far into the video, I should mention that this is the 22nd in a series of videos where I'm playing every single game in the Yakuza series for the first time in release order and reviewing them as I go along. You don't have to have seen the other videos in the series in order to enjoy this one, but I would highly recommend that you've seen my video on the original Ishin, as I'm going to be talking more about the changes and how this product is as a remake, rather than reviewing the base game itself. So if you want to get my thoughts on the original Ishin before hearing about the changes and such made here, definitely go check that out first. Oh, and of course, that means a huge spoiler warning for pretty much the whole video if you yourself haven't played Ishin yet. But for those of you who are interested in checking out either my original Ishin video or any of my other Yakuza videos either before or after watching this one, I'll have the full playlist linked in the description below. But with that out of the way, Like a Dragon Ishin is a remake of Ryu Ga Gotoku Ishin developed by Ryu Ga Gotoku Studio and published by Sega for the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, and PC in 2023. Compared to the other Kiwami titles that preceded it, Ishin Kiwami sticks a lot closer to the original, making a lot of small tweaks and very careful overhauls rather than recreating all of the core gameplay mechanics and systems from scratch. That being said though, one of the biggest changes here is one that fans of the series never really saw coming: the move to Unreal Engine 4 in place of the Dragon Engine. The stated reason from RGG Studio for this change is that the Dragon Engine isn't very good at rendering daytime scenes, so for a game like Ishin that largely takes place during the day, they wanted an engine that would be able to make that look better. So they're fully aware that their engine consistently has awful daytime lighting, yet they still haven't fixed it. Although with this change to Unreal Engine 4, I have to say that this game just looks weird. Some story scenes and areas in the game look great, while others look downright bad. There is some very poor use of post-processing effects here, likely due to RGG not being familiar with Unreal Engine's pipelines, and some insanely inconsistent lighting that often looks straight up amateurish. There's also some really bad pop-in issues here that are most noticeable right after a loading screen, which, while not a big deal, just stacks up with the other issues and makes the game look even worse, especially when the original Ishin didn't suffer from any of these problems. The pre-rendered cutscenes in this game also play at 30 FPS here instead of the considerably smoother 60 FPS they played at on the PS4 version of the original Ishin. And yes, these are just cutscenes, so I'm sure some people will think that bringing this up is just needless nitpicking that doesn't really affect much of anything. But the 30 FPS seen in the pre-rendered scenes has some of the worst frame pacing that I've seen from a game in recent years, leading to a lot of them looking super choppy and just bad. Especially during panning, establishing shots, or more high-action moments where the camera is moving around a lot. Now, I think it's worth mentioning that some scenes look utterly fantastic in this remake, but unfortunately, I would say that Ishin Kiwami actually looks worse than the PS4 version of the original Ishin like 70% of the time, which was just super disappointing. And while performance was generally fine for me, I did want to mention here that getting my first revelation also crashed my 4080 GPU, which is just insane to say out loud, especially for a game that doesn't really look like a 2023 release. I would later learn that the problem was actually just something to do with this specific heat action that the revelation was unlocking, as this heat action would actually go on to crash my GPU a couple more times throughout the rest of my playthrough, which was super unfortunate as it's a really useful heat action that also looks awesome, but I eventually just learned to stop using it entirely here so that it wouldn't crash my PC again. Thankfully though, Ishin Kiwami has some pretty awesome localization work, with even lesser known regional accents like the Tosa accent being translated over as well as they realistically can. And the glossary feature from Kenzan also having been added here to allow you to read up on relevant historical terms that most non-Japanese players likely aren't familiar with. Now, I don't feel that the glossary feature here does a great job of explaining things, with the little explanations often having like the most minimal details possible that don't really give you a strong idea of what that term is referencing, but it's nice to at least have a little bit of context, as I had to do a lot of reading up on Japanese history during my playthrough of the original to even know what they were talking about a lot of the time. It's worth mentioning that there were also a solid amount of typos and such in the English translation here, but it was nothing egregious, and I definitely feel that the good of this localization definitely outweighs the bad. A pretty significant change to the story here is that a good number of the core cast members have been recast for this remake, and I have to say, I'm pretty mixed on the recasts overall. I felt that most of them didn't quite match the performances seen in the original, with most of them not being massive downgrades or anything. I mean, pretty much every actor they brought in here is incredibly talented, but it was definitely noticeable for me as someone who played the original. However, there are two particular characters that I did feel were major downgrades, those being Takechi Hanpeita and Todo Heisuke. Hanpeita in the original was played by Katsunori Takahashi, who had never had a prior appearance in a Yakuza game, and funny enough, hasn't actually had one since either. He gave a fantastic performance, and his likeness fit the character almost perfectly. In Ishin Kiwami though, he's played by Hideo Nakano, who had previously played Keiji Shibusawa in Yakuza 0. His performance is still great. I mean, Nakano is an amazing actor, but it definitely doesn't feel like it fits Hanpeita as well as Takahashi's performance did. And that's not even mentioning that changing his likeness makes the character look significantly older, which just makes it a little hard to believe that he and Ryoma are sworn brothers who are roughly the same age. It also kind of gives away the twist of him being the ultimate mastermind and primary antagonist of the entire plot, as Ishin's characters were all written to loosely match the same archetypes as their mainline series counterparts, and Shibusawa was the ultimate mastermind and most dangerous antagonist of Kiryu's in Yakuza 0. A similar thing applies to Todo Heisuke, who was played by Shunsuke Daito in the original, who had previously played Shigeki Baba in Yakuza 5. But here in Kiwami, he's played by Nobuhiko Okamoto, who previously played Tien Yo Jiao in Yakuza 7. Bringing in Daito to play this character in the original was awesome, as Todo is a character who starts as a slightly menacing ally, only to betray Ryoma and his allies later, but then ultimately reveal right at the end that he was a spy working with Ryoma's allies the entire time. It took that idea that Ishin's characters are loosely similar to their prior appearances in the series, making you think that he had really betrayed Ryoma, but then allowed for the actual twist that he ultimately didn't betray him after all. Having Okamoto play him here, though, doesn't really feel like it matches either way, as Zhao is a charismatic antagonist who never really is out to kill you or anything, he's just kinda working against you because he's supposed to, who then quickly becomes an ally by like the halfway point of Yakuza 7. So he doesn't quite match the character of Todo Heisuke in Ishin. In the interest of being fair though, one recast that I actually really enjoyed was them bringing in Akio Otsuka, who had previously played Koichi Adachi in Yakuza 7, to play Kondo Isami. In the original release of Ishin, Isami was played by Eiichiro Funakoshi, who was amazing in the role and hadn't played a character in the series prior, making him a truly unpredictable character throughout the story. As much as I loved Fukunoshi's Isami though, I fucking love Otsuka as an actor to begin with, and I feel like the extra charisma that he brings to Isami through his performance only made the character even more enjoyable. Overall, I would say that the recasts feel like they've lost some of the appeal of the original characters, but Akio Otsuka as Kondo Isami is the exception that almost single-handedly makes up for all of it. I do think it's funny that, as far as I could tell, every single recast here is an actor who previously played a character in either Yakuza 0 or Yakuza 7, almost like they intentionally recast to actors from those two games, simply because they were the best-selling titles at this point in the series, so bringing back actors from those games might have led to increased sales for more casual fans, but that admittedly might be a bit tinfoil hat of me. Overall though, Ishin definitely had one of my favorite main stories from the entire Yakuza franchise, and it's still awesome here. Some slight hiccups with certain scenes not looking great, or some of the recasts being a bit questionable, but the story beneath all that is still an awesome piece of historical fiction. A lot of the main story bosses even got new themes in this game, with most of them being traditional Japanese-style remixes of their corresponding character's theme from the mainline titles. So, for example, they have Fly in here for the fight against the character played by the actor of Yoshitaka Mine, but it's been remixed to become a traditional Japanese version of Fly. There were a couple of these in the original Ishin, with the Receive You remix for Majima's fight, and the As a Man, As a Brother remix for Ryuji's fight, both having been in the original to begin with. But Ishin Kiwami added a ton of new ones, and now pretty much every major fight like this has one, which is just really awesome. My only real complaint with the story here is that for some reason, the post-credits scene of a man and his son looking at a statue of Sakamoto Ryoma and appreciating how his actions led to Japan being where it is today has been removed. This was legitimately the perfect note to end the game on, and I really have no idea why they cut it out entirely from Ishin Kiwami. I'll stop myself before I nitpick the story changes to death though, so moving into the gameplay, let's talk about combat. The combat of Ishin was always pretty arcadey compared to most Yakuza titles, with a combo counter on screen at all times, and the game giving you a combat rating at the end of every single fight, with higher ratings granting larger experience bonuses for that fight. The combat of Ishin Kiwami leans even further into this than the original did, with all of those systems being carried over here, and even some new additions like damage numbers. There are also quite a few small changes that have been made to nearly every single one of Ryoma's 4 fighting styles. I'll go through the ones that I noticed during my time with the game, though I'm sure that there are some that I didn't notice as well, as it has been about a year since I played the original Ishin. I did boot up the original Ishin again and just play around a bit to make sure that I was right about these changes, but if I happen to miss one, please go easy on me in the comments. The fighter style from the original has been renamed to the brawler style, which might seem insignificant, but it's actually kind of cool considering that Kiryu would go on to get a style called brawler in Yakuza 0 and Kiwami 1, and this would become one of his most iconic styles. So this slight renaming actually makes it feel more in line with the mainline games in a way. The brawler style's parries will still grant you a buff, but this buff has been significantly nerfed compared to the original. The original's parry buff would last for about 5 seconds and give you invincibility to incoming attacks, as well as significantly increased attack speed. It was so good that landing a parry in brawler style would allow you to just infinitely combo an enemy by mashing the square button until the buff was gone. Here in Ishin Kiwami though, the buff has been shortened to only be about a second long, and it lost the attack speed buff entirely, meaning that you now only get a very brief window of invincibility for landing a successful parry. I'm not really sure why they thought Brawler of all styles would need such a significant nerf here, considering it's always kind of been the weakest style in the game purely due to the lack of damage scaling for many weapons. But we unfortunately live in the timeline where they decided that Brawler style needed to be even weaker in Kiwami. The one sword style has been left pretty much unchanged though, aside from being renamed to Swordsman style. It's still an extremely versatile all-rounder style that doesn't really do any one thing exceptionally well, but has a ton of counterplay options and a solid answer to nearly every single challenge in the game. It was incredibly well designed in the original, and it's still incredibly well designed here, so if anything, this was the one style that deserved to be left untouched. The handgun style has been renamed to Gunman style here, and has one of the smallest yet most impactful changes out of all of them. See, in Ishin Kiwami, any attack in the Gunman style that comes from the player pressing the heavy attack button on their controller now fires off whatever special ammunition you have equipped. In the original, the only way to fire off your special ammo was to press the heavy attack button while not in the middle of a combo or attack string. But now, any heavy attack input will result in your special rounds being fired off. This might not seem like such a huge deal at first, but it allows for all of the more crowd control oriented combos that this style has to now fire out special rounds, making them even stronger with the right ammo type equipped. The only real downside to this change is that I found that I burned through my special ammo reserves way faster and almost never had much special ammo to use because of it. But aside from that, it's hard to deny just how much stronger this makes a lot of the style's basic attack strings. The Wild Dancer style is the only style of the four not to actually be renamed in Ishin Kiwami, but that doesn't mean that it's been left unchanged, as unfortunately, Wild Dancer has received the heftiest nerfs out of any of them. Wild Dancer style was always kind of the strongest style in the original game if you put in the time to learn it, with some of the coolest interactions and high-level techniques that we've seen from the franchise still to this day. I was hoping that it would be left this way in Ishin Kiwami, as it was cool to have a style that wasn't immediately the best one, but could become the best one if you put in the time. But unfortunately, that's not the case. They've significantly reduced the amount of damage some of the style's strongest heat actions deal, even shortening some of their animations and reducing the amount of hits in them in some cases. And things like the crazy animation cancels and such that were possible in the original have been nerfed by either making the hitboxes of certain attacks smaller, or by slowing down the animations of them in order to make infinite loops no longer possible. Like, seriously, in the original Ishin, you could do shit like this, and just look at how cool and satisfying that is once you're in the rhythm of it. In Ishin Kiwami, though, yeah, no longer really possible. So overall, Ishin Kiwami's combat just feels like the original's combat, but slightly worse. Not because the core systems or mechanics have really changed all that much, but because some of the abilities that made the combat styles feel so smooth to play and just so fun when upgraded have been toned down, or in some cases, removed entirely. It's still a great combat system that's a lot of fun to play around with, but it's super unfortunate that some of what made the original Ishin's combat so enjoyable was seen by RGG as some sort of problem that needed to be fixed, rather than a core part of the game's fun that should be embraced. There is still one more big change that needs to be talked about though, with this one being universal rather than specific to one style. That of course being the trooper card system overhaul. In the original Ishin, Ryoma was able to collect trooper cards and put together squads of soldiers to take with him into the game's battle dungeons. but this system was completely limited to said dungeons. In Ishin Kiwami, though, the trooper cards are introduced when the dungeons become available, but are a universal system present in all of the game's combat from that point on. So in Ishin Kiwami, you get to put together a set of troops for each of your 4 styles, and all of the passive buffs and abilities granted by said troops will be active whenever using that style. The troopers' abilities have also been changed quite a bit. In the original Ishin, you would have to manually activate a trooper card to gain any benefit from it, and when you did activate them, they would all be simple buffs like raising your attack damage or your defense, or even just passively healing you over time. Here in Ishin Kiwami though, each card has a slight passive buff that they apply at all times when using their respective style, and the active abilities are actual abilities now, like shooting lightning out of your hands or opening up a black hole that pulls all the enemies to one place. These feel really similar to the essences from the Judgment games, which is fun in a way, but just like they do in Judgment, they definitely have a similarly negative impact on the tone. Like, it's really fun to be able to use these things, but it kind of ruins that super dramatic historical fiction vibe that the game has going. And don't even get me started on how silly it is when you're in the middle of an intense sword duel, and then you or the boss just start shooting fireballs at each other. Oh yeah, and I actually forgot to write this in the script, but the enemies have their own cards that they can activate during battle too. So you can't even ignore this system if you want to maintain the original's tone, as various high-level enemies or bosses will just start shooting lightning or fireballs at you anyway. I get what they were going for with this overhaul, as they were clearly trying to lean more into the silly JRPG side of the franchise, but in my opinion, it takes away from the game more than it adds to it. Moving into progression though, thankfully, Ishin's awesome leveling system returns virtually unchanged here. You still get style-specific skill points that are earned by using each style and leveling it up throughout your playthrough, as well as generic skill points that can be spent on any style, which are earned by just gaining experience and leveling up Ryoma himself. On top of that though, there's a fantastic new addition where you can now swap out a generic skill point that you've already slotted into a tree for a style-specific skill point later on, allowing you to move around those generic points to other styles later if you need to. Not a huge change by any means, but a really nice quality of life addition. What's not so nice, however, is what they've done to the crafting system. The entire gear crafting system has been completely overhauled compared to the original, with some positive changes and some negative. Starting with the positives, they've added this nice new chart in the crafting menus that clearly shows you how each piece of gear in the game can be upgraded into one another. The original Ishin didn't have any sort of chart like this, so you would just end up blindly crafting upgrades for each sword or gun to see what it would turn into. Here in Ishin Kiwami though, you can clearly see what every sword turns into all the way down the line, and decide which path you want to go down right from the start, which is a very, very nice quality of life improvement. They've also added a new system to the crafting here in the form of seals. These seals can be found throughout the world, or picked up off of enemies that you've defeated, and then added to a seal slot on a piece of gear to add some small extra upgrade to it, like increasing the damage of a weapon by 2%, or increasing your heat generation when using that weapon by 3%. These feel a little bit silly given the setting, and definitely a bit overly video gamey, but they're admittedly kind of fun to mess around with, and I enjoyed trying to find the right balance between extra damage or defense and other things like heat generation. Getting into the negative changes though, there's the new addition of the smithing level. The smithing level is a separate level from your character that is increased every time you craft or upgrade something at the blacksmith, with higher level gear pieces requiring a higher smithing level to be crafted. This seems like a perfectly fine addition at first, but as you actually start crafting and upgrading, you'll quickly realize that this bar fills incredibly slowly. It takes a ton of crafting to level up your smithing level, and even if you use the alternative sources of experience, like just straight up donating extra swords and guns that you're not using to the blacksmith, it takes ages to level up your smithing level. I dug pretty deep into the crafting over my 40+ hour playthrough for this video, and I only barely ended up hitting level 10 of 20. It's absurdly grindy, and Ishin's crafting system was already fairly grindy before this, so I'm not really sure why they felt a new system needed to be added to pad it out even more. And honestly, the worst part of the blacksmith in Ishin Kiwami is the sheer cost of it all. Along with bringing the smith the necessary materials for whatever you're trying to create, you'll also need to pay a sum of cash for the actual labor. But the cash amounts required in the remake have been significantly increased compared to the original. In the original Ishin, I spent most of my time grinding for upgrades, running through dungeons, and farming the correct materials. But in Ishin Kiwami, I spent most of my time grinding out money by working the small jobs around town or running the highest paying dungeons on loop. The whole system has just been stretched out to take what feels like double the time that it took in the original, and like I said, the original was already pretty grindy, so I have no idea why it was adjusted in this way. Now, getting into the open world stuff, you might be surprised to learn that this will probably be the most positive section of the video. The world has been left largely the same in terms of layout and points of interest, with some small improvements throughout, like how a number of buildings can now be seamlessly walked in and out of without a loading screen, which was never possible in the original due to it still being on the Yakuza 5 engine. The only tiny detail that's been removed from the open world is the special effects that you would get from eating at restaurants. This was a carryover from Yakuza 5, and one that I always really loved, as it gave you a reason to actually go to the restaurants regularly and order everything on the menu to figure out how you could get the best buffs, rather than just treating restaurants as an emergency healing option. This has been removed entirely in Ishin Kiwami though, and similar to a lot of the remake's changes, I'm not really sure why. Though my best guess is that they removed them since the trooper cards are always active now, and provide their own passive buffs. Still super unfortunate to see these effects removed though, as Ishin was only one of the 2 games in the franchise to ever have them, so now as far as most Yakuza fans outside of Japan are concerned, Yakuza 5 is the only game to have ever had them. All of the original Ishin's mini-games have been brought over here and are exactly the same as they were though, with the slight exception of the karaoke minigame, which is still here, but now has an entirely different set of songs compared to the original. Ishin definitely had one of the most unique minigame rosters of the entire franchise, so seeing that not a single one of them has been cut or reworked was really nice. All of the original sub-stories have returned as well. Well, not all of them, as there is one sub-story that was cut due to it regarding subject matter and using language that's no longer viewed as culturally acceptable in Japan, but that's the only original Ishin sub-story that isn't present in Ishin Kiwami. To make up for it, there are a handful of new sub-stories featuring new historical renditions of side characters from other Yakuza games that came out after the original Ishin, with characters like Miss Tatsu or Bacchus from Yakuza 0 getting their own brand new questlines here. Ishin always had a great selection of sub-stories, so the fact that they kept just about every single one and only added on even more is a really great thing. Now, probably the most controversial part of Ishin's open world, the battle dungeons from the original have also returned. And these are probably the most significantly changed piece of side content in the entire remake. The whole visual styles and atmospheres of these dungeons have been changed in Ishin Kiwami, with some of these being as simple as just lighting or mood changes, but some of them being as extreme as the final set of dungeons being changed from a Toyotomi stronghold to a stronghold of the Sanada clan. The gameplay of these dungeons have been changed quite a bit as well, as in the original, your cards made the dungeons have their own unique sort of RPG leveling system that you had to slowly climb through to be able to survive and defeat enemies in the later dungeons. In Ishin Kiwami though, the effects of the cards have been nerfed, so they don't really affect the standard gameplay too much, which is good for this now being a universal mechanic, but it also led to the later dungeons not really feeling that much harder than the earlier ones, as they've been adjusted to have less of a stat difference between them. A bunch of the dungeons in the original Ishin would also have special restrictions on what cards you could or couldn't use, giving each of them their own unique challenge modifier. But this has just been removed entirely, allowing players to simply use whatever cards they like here in the remake. This is fine, albeit a bit less interesting, but in some cases it can be a little awkward as the names of each dungeon haven't been changed in the remake. So you get these moments where you find a dungeon called Spear Trooper Training, which in the original was called that because you were only allowed to bring Spear Troop cards, but now they just mean nothing, and the names seem completely random. There are also these new massive enemies that have been added to the remake, and these appear most often in the battle dungeons. In fact, now that I think about it, I'm not sure if I even saw a single one of them outside of the dungeons. There's not a whole lot to say about these guys, they're just giant enemies with a ton of health and really high attack power. And I could bring up how this sort of thing breaks the immersion of the original game, but at this point, I feel like a broken record saying it over and over again. Overall though, I enjoyed Ishin Kiwami, but it's a really weird remake for me to try to judge. It was really fun to revisit Ishin, and I did have a genuinely good time, but I feel like nearly everything that I had fun with here was something that was already in the original, and a lot of the things that took away from my fun or things that I didn't like were changes that were made for the remake. The story is still awesome, but things like the recasts and the small removals made it a little less enjoyable than in the original. The combat is still really good in this game, but all of the best parts were toned down and nerfed, and the trooper card overhaul was something that I just didn't really enjoy. The progression is still super fun when it comes to leveling up the different styles and doing all the training, but the crafting and gear upgrading has been made significantly worse. And while the open world and side content is definitely the closest to being as good as the original, there are still little things like the food effects being removed or the battle dungeons being made less interesting that just made them slightly less enjoyable. So overall, this is a title that is still a good game, but it's a pretty poor remake in my opinion. It's one thing if you have a remake like the other Kiwamis where the entire experience is different and made from scratch, because then, even if you don't enjoy all of the changes, they still offer two entirely different experiences that you might replay for different reasons. But Ishin Kiwami doesn't really feel like that. This remake feels like it offers the same experience, but just downgraded in a lot of little ways, meaning I don't really see why I would revisit this one over the original, which is disappointing enough for someone like me who played and loved the original, but is even more so for the thousands of fans out there who can't play the original because they can't understand Japanese. This should have been the biggest slam dunk opportunity for RGG to bring Ishin to all of those fans who had always wished that they could enjoy it, and while it's great that Ishin is available to them now and this is still a good game, it sucks that I have to sit here and say that the version that's available to them is a fairly downgraded version. So at the end of the day, I'm going to give Like a Dragon Ishin a 7.8 out of 10. That's going to wrap up this video, but do be sure to check out my other Yakuza videos if you haven't already, or if you're looking to branch out a bit, maybe check out the series we did a while back where I played and reviewed every game in the Resident Evil series. Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to our channel members and patrons who make series like this one possible. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and help me out with the algorithm, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one, and I hope to see all of you right back here for the next Yakuza review.